10% are already here by one means or another and have become legalized, and 79% through family sponsorship. So the key is to get a family member into the United States through normal channels legally, and then sponsor all of your relatives, whether they're relatives or not. If you can convince somebody at the INS that they are a relative, however distant that cousin may be, they are far more eligible than just about anybody else. In other words, you have to game the system, pay lawyers, fill out applications, and go through a very complicated approval process. Hello, everyone. This is Mark Shupe, and welcome to the Moneyball Method podcast. I am the author of the Moneyball Method, a middle-class manifesto for objective investing. And today I would like to talk about government regulation, and in particular, link together three subjects that seemingly have nothing to do with each other. The first one is television sets. The second one is residential housing. And the third one is immigration. And I begin my story with television sets. I decided to switch my service from fiber optic cable to internet streaming. And one of the television sets in my home was a plasma TV, flat screen, Panasonic from about 20 years ago. And I needed to replace it with a smart TV, one that could handle streaming services, internet-based platform. And what I discovered in replacing that 20-year-old TV is that the 20-year-old TV weighed 60 or 70 pounds. It was as heavy as it could be. I needed two people to help me move it downstairs and out to the garage. The one that I replaced it with probably weighed 10 pounds. It was as light as it could be. But not only was it as light as it could be, especially relative to the 20-year-old set that was loaded with heavy hardware, chassis, copper wire, etc., but the cost of the TV that I replaced it with was about $300. And as I recall, 20 years ago, the price of the Panasonic plasma flat screen was around $1,800. In fact, I looked it up. The list price was $2,500. But I had acquired that TV through my cousin, who was a specialist in audiovisual equipment. His business was to consult and install audiovisual systems in households all over the Northeast and in America. So I was comparing $1,800 versus $300. That's 6 times difference. The old TV cost 6 times as much in dollar terms, but is that accurate? No, it is not. Today, if we do it in terms of the price of gold is over $5,000 an ounce. 20 years ago, it was between $600 and $700 an ounce. So not only did I get a television that was up to the standards of today's internet-driven smart TV platform at about 1/6 of the weight and 1/6 of the dollar price, it was actually a heck of a lot cheaper than that. If I had bought that television 20 years ago in gold, it would have cost 3 ounces. If I bought my TV today and paid in gold, it would cost me 6/100ths of an ounce. How is it possible that the quality of the television set grew exponentially and the price of the television set dropped exponentially? And one of the big reasons for that is technology and innovation from television sets and the internet in general is not regulated by any federal government. So I'm going to move into another area, one I've talked about extensively and written about extensively on Substack, and that is the so-called housing crisis, particularly the price of home ownership, residential housing. And I'm going to quote some politicians to get a sense of what the regulatory environment is like. And these politicians are not unusual. They reflect the common wisdom of the entire society, at least here in America. The first two quotes, the first two interviewees, are from the October 17th, 2025 interview that they had with journalist Bret Baier on Common Ground at Fox News. Bret Baier began the broadcast by quoting President Trump, who said, "Affordable home ownership is a fundamental part of the American dream." Almost everybody believes that. That is not true. However, it is a myth that has been promulgated over the last century by politicians in order for politicians to believe that they're doing you a favor in terms of making home ownership less expensive and keep you in your voting district to help keep the incumbents in power. The first senator that was interviewed by Bret Baier was Senator Ruben Gallego, a Democrat from Arizona. And I quote, "A lot of young home buyers don't have any ability for that first down payment. He must think that everyone under the age of 30 is a broke, dumb rube." First of all, the down payment for a first home is always a challenge for a young home buyer. It's always been that way. And to say that they don't have any ability is to discount their agency, their self-determination, their self-reliance. The second thing he said was, and I quote, "Take $50,000 out of your IRA without any penalty and use that money for a down payment." All of a sudden, these young home buyers have $50,000. Where did that come from? It came from a qualified retirement plan, a complicated system set up by the federal government to justify the income tax and in order to pretend that they're doing you a favor. So all of a sudden, these young home buyers have the capacity to make a down payment. That is part of a new piece of legislation sponsored by Ruben Gallego and Senator Todd Young, a Republican from Indiana, called the Uplifting First-Time Home Buyers Act. That's a bucolic-sounding name. They're always a bucolic-sounding name. But the interview then switched to Senator Todd Young, and I quote him, "A lot of federal policies are not crafted to address this problem." Well, that's good. The more federal policies we have crafted to address problems that the government has no business intruding on are the cause of the problem. Government is not your nanny. They are not mommy and daddy. They should not be intruding on home ownership or economic affairs in general. Quote number 2 from Senator Todd Young. And this is the Republican talking. "The median cost of a house was about $115,000. 30 years later, it's up 5 times that. 5 times that. That would be a $700,000 house. Most new home buyers are not looking at anything in the $700,000 range unless it's in an expensive metro urban area in New York or California or perhaps Chicago, some other Tony zip code." His third quote, "People withdrawing money from their IRAs will bring revenue into the federal government. It's a win-win situation." He really said that. More money to the federal government is a win-win situation. I disagree. More money to the federal government is a lose-lose situation. That money could have been invested efficiently, which always creates more innovation, which always drives down prices. For example, my $300 television set that cost me 6/100ths of an ounce of gold when the one I replaced cost 3 ounces of gold 20 years ago, thanks to federal intrusion in the money supply and in particular monetary inflation. Quote number 4 from Senator Todd Young, "People need to get into a house early to realize the benefits of generational wealth and asset appreciation." Never mind the fact that the price appreciation of homes is a lot less than the S&P 500 or the Russell 3000 over that same period. And secondly, a home does not create wealth. It is a consumption asset. The wealth that you see in terms of price appreciation is a myth. It's a function of monetary devaluation, and there is no intergenerational transfer of wealth except in terms of highly depreciated dollars for an asset that is a consumption asset. Now I'd like to move forward to last month, and in particular, another interview with two other politicians, one Republican, one Democrat, also on the show Common Ground with Bret Baier. This one aired on January 27th. Today is February 1st, so that was only 4 days ago. And like before, it starts with a quote from President Trump, who doesn't know anything about economics, nor do any of his counterparts in either the Republican or Democratic Party, let alone the Federal Reserve. But I digress. Quoting President Trump, home ownership has always been a sign of health and vigor of American society. But that goal fell out of reach for millions of people in the Biden era. Homes are built for people, not for corporations, and America will not become a nation of renters. What is President Trump talking about? He's talking about institutional investment firms buying residential housing, renovating them, and renting them to people that would like to rent a home. It is the free flow of capital to its most productive use. It is capitalism. President Trump is not a capitalist. And he blames this for the inflation that occurred between 2020 and 2025, primarily during the Biden administration, all of which is true except for one thing, the cause. The cause of that was the lockdowns. The lockdowns began during the Trump administration. But regarding the congressmen, these are not senators, these are congressmen this time. I want to start with Democrat Josh Riley from New York, who was interviewed by Bret Baier. And I quote, "Houses should be for families to make homes and raise their kids, not for Wall Street bankers to make profits and screw us over." That is the kind of language that incites protests, violence, riots. That is the kind of language that is even worse than what President Trump said. Yes, of course, homes are for families and raising children. They are a consumption asset, as I said. But Wall Street bankers are not villains. In fact, there is no such thing as Wall Street. Wall Street, like any industry, is a collection of individuals pursuing their rational self-interest under the regulations of objective law, hopefully, and making profits is a noble endeavor. If there is money to be made buying homes and renting them to willing renters, that is a good thing. Number two from Josh Riley, we have these massive investors gobbling up homes and crowding out families, just trying to have a shot at the American dream. He's making the exact same false case as President Trump did, and every other politician that Bret Baier might want to interview or any other network might want to interview. Massive investors gobbling up homes. The last I checked, there's about 1 million homes that are owned by investment firms. That's a very small percentage of the total number of homes that are owned by individuals. Number three, and I quote, 34% of homes bought by investors in the third quarter of 2025. That's Bret Baier talking. He's asking Josh Riley about that, who says, "When I say the economy is rigged and our whole political system screwing us over, that is exactly what I'm talking about." The whole political system screwing us over. Josh Riley is a member of the Democratic Party. He is part of the political system. More government intrusion, more government regulation is the problem. 34% of homes being bought by institutional investors in the third quarter of 2025 means that there is a need. And they are filling that need just like they did during 2008 and early in 2020 when the economy was going into a recession. Institutional investors were needed at that time. Quote number 5 from Josh Riley, "They're competing against a bunch of paper-pushing Wall Street bankers who have never punched a clock in their life, who see the housing stock as a chance for them to get more rich." This is vile. This is vicious language. This is a total intentional misunderstanding of free market economics, of the Declaration of Independence, and what it means to pursue your life, liberty, and happiness. Now I'd like to turn to Congressman Pat Harrigan, this time a Republican who was interviewed by Bret Baier. And he says in 2011, there were 0 large single-family rental portfolios. In 2015, there were about 300,000 homes that were moved into this. That number is about 1 million. Okay, now we have 1 million residential single-family homes that are owned by investment companies. That's grown from 300,000 9 years ago and 0, according to Pat Harrigan in 2011. Is that a bad thing? Money follows opportunity. Money flows to where it's treated fairly, justly. Money flows to where it's respected. Money is filling a need that the market has identified. This is a good thing. Number 2, we are locking the middle class out of the single greatest wealth driver in the nation's history, which is home ownership. It is not. In fact, I've already proven that home ownership barely breaks even with regard to monetary inflation. Number 4, this will apply to homes owned or sold by FHA. What is he talking about here? These 2 congressmen have introduced a bill called the Families First Housing Act. Like the previous one I mentioned, they are both in committee. They have not been enacted yet, but another bucolic sounding name that does not put families first, except in the title. He's saying this will apply to homes owned or sold by FHA, Fannie and Freddie, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It will not apply to private market sales. This is good. Listen closely. Josh and I have had extensive conversations making sure that we're not doing something that is unconstitutional here or that impacts on free market principles. That is key. What are they saying? What are they admitting to? They are saying that any home that is owned or controlled by FHA, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, or the USDA is unconstitutional and is in violation of free market principles. They are admitting a fact of reality. That is true. And they are jumping on the bandwagon of anti-constitutional regulated market principles that have caused the housing crisis in the first place. Now I'd like to switch gears, talk about regulation in terms of something completely different, and that is immigration. Immigration is certainly in the news, particularly in America, and particularly with Immigration and Naturalization Services through the DHS, particularly ICE officers in cities, particularly in cities that are sanctuary cities throughout America, that have been targeted to apprehend violent criminals who are here illegally, as well as perhaps anyone else who is not here legally. When did this start? What is the cause? How did this happen? No one is discussing the root causes of the immigration debate, of the immigration conflicts, of the immigration riots, of the immigration violence. When did it begin? What is the cause? And like before, my contention is that the cause is government regulation. What is regulation? Regulation is preemptive law. Regulation requires businesses and individuals to prove their innocence. It negates the innocent until proven guilty premise that is behind America's justice system, our rule of law. And it began in 1924 during the presidential administration of Calvin Coolidge, one of the good guys, one of the best presidents, in my opinion, of the 20th century. And I'm going to do something I have never done in my life, and that is quote a section from the United States Code, Section 1361, U.S. Code 8. The burden of proof shall be upon such person to establish that he is eligible to receive such visa or such document or is not admissible under any provision of this chapter. And if an alien, that he is entitled to the non-immigrant, immigrant, special immigrant, immediate relative, or refugee status claimed, as the case may be, if that he is eligible to receive a visa or other document required for entry, no visa or other document required for entry shall be issued to such person. An individual has to prove their innocence, their eligibility to qualify for one of several visa applications. In essence, a green card. This is the beginning of the immigration problem. It is when the federal government decided that they were going to regulate immigration. You're guilty until proven innocent. You must prove your eligibility, much like you have to do if you are subject to an investigation by the Environmental Protection Agency, the CFPB in terms of financial services, the IRS, I should add. And it's made it extremely complicated and expensive and time-consuming and almost impossible for anyone to get into the United States legally. And what I'm going to do is quote an article from the Cato Institute. This was published in November, I believe November 24th of last year. Since 1990, no one outside the United States has been eligible for a green card unless they can prove they fall into one of these 5 narrow exceptions. Only 3% of legal immigrants come in through the refugee program, 2% through the diversity lottery, whatever that is, 1% from employment-based self-sponsorship, 5% from employer sponsorship, 10% are already here by one means or another and have become legalized, and 79% through family sponsorship. So the key is to get a family member into the United States through normal channels legally, and then sponsor all of your relatives, whether they're relatives or not. If you can convince somebody at the INS that they are a relative, however distant that cousin may be, they are far more eligible than just about anybody else. In other words, you have to game the system, pay lawyers, fill out applications, and go through a very complicated approval process. Now I'm going to quote another report from the Cato Institute, this time from June 13th, 2023. And this is a flow chart that describes the application process for legal immigration. What is the purpose of a flow chart? The purpose of a flow chart is to make it simpler, not oversimplified, just simpler, understandable. Give it some kind of structure. Structure is important. As the complicated flowchart indicates, legal immigration is a labyrinth that few can navigate, and a chart like this must necessarily simplify the more complex reality. It does not show, for instance, the complicated filing and admission process, but rather the rules that the filing process is supposed to enforce. And getting back to my report of November 24th, 2025 from the Cato Institute, the recent ICE raids, arrests, deportations, statistics compiled by the Cato Institute indicate that 73% of those apprehended and deported have no convictions. The Trump administration may be going after violent offenders, as they should, as the Biden administration facilitated and invited and subsidized. Those are not the people that are affected most. According to the Cato Institute, 73% are not violent offenders. They have not violated anybody's rights. The purpose of the federal government is to protect people's rights. Everything else is subsequent to that. So what is the Moneyball Method solution, or at least answer to the questions about immigration? And I want to refer to a book by economist Julian Simon called The Ultimate Resource. Economists like to talk about scarcity, but what is the most scarce resource? That is innovative, active minds. Those are people that are producing, building, creating value, scientific discoveries, innovation. The more free and active minds you have in any society, in any culture, and in any economy, the more progress there will be, the more innovation there will be, the more wealth creation there will be, and you will get lower prices, greater prosperity, and greater happiness. And with that, I'd like to conclude my talk about television sets residential housing, and immigration, and hope that you will join me next week. Thank you for joining.